This is a world gone mad. This is a world gone mad. Mad, 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 mad.
I'm Jeff Allen Wolf. This is A World Gone Mad. And it's time for another Monday Madness. Here we go. Last night, Trump posts that he's holding off on hitting Iran's power plants for 5 days, saying there's been a very good and productive conversation with Iran, and that there are major points of agreement. Now, that's not small, that's not routine. That's Trump pulling back on a major escalation, telling you it's because talks are going so well that everything just changed. At the exact same time, Iran comes out and says those talks didn't happen. Not that talks failed, not that they're ongoing. They're saying there were no talks with Donald Trump. None. So now you've got Trump saying progress, real progress, enough for Trump to stop escalation, and the other side saying the entire thing Trump is pointing to does not exist. That isn't spin, that isn't interpretation. That's a direct collision with reality. Follow Trump's claim. Major points of agreement means talks happen. Real talks. Something that actually took place. Something that produced enough movement for Trump to change course. That's what Trump's asking you to accept. Now put that next to what Iran is saying. No talks. None. Basically, Donald Trump is making shit up in real time again. Trump's explanation either describes something real or describes something that did not happen. Those are the only options when you look at it. That's the entire list. Trump doesn't get a middle version. Trump doesn't get to blur that line. Trump doesn't get to claim results from something that the other side says never existed. And this is where it starts to tighten. Because Trump's tying a major decision to that claim. Trump's saying this decision is based on progress. Trump's saying there's something there that justifies pulling back on the war. Trump's pointing to something specific, saying that's the reason. Except one side again is saying there's nothing there. So the question isn't complicated, listeners. Either Trump's right, those talks happened, or Trump's pointing to something that did not happen at all. No third version that fixes that. There's no middle ground that makes both sides correct. And the longer we sit with that, the worse it gets. Because if Trump's right, then Iran's denying something real and significant. And if Iran's right, then Trump's presenting something that does not line up with reality. Either way, Trump's at the center of a contradiction that doesn't resolve. And this is where it breaks open. Because Trump's standing there pointing to something that isn't even there and using it like it's the reason everything changed. Just say it. Move on. Expect that to be enough. Interpretation, Wolfpack listeners, everyone with me, join with me. Trump is making shit up again just because he can. And that's the problem. Because once you start seeing how this works, it doesn't stay in one place. It doesn't stay contained to one subject. It carries over, shows up again, but just in a different form. Because then Trump turns around and reacts to Robert Mueller's dying or death by posting, "Good, I'm glad he's dead." And you got to stop right there. That tells you something all by itself. Not policy, not strategy, not leadership, not even an attempt to sound like a president. Just that. A man dies after a lifetime of public service, and Trump's response is to spit on the grave and move on. And it's not just Mueller. You saw the same thing when Trump went after Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle, throwing out personal shots that were cold, callous, completely unnecessary. The kind of thing that doesn't come from strength. It comes from insecurity. It lands the same way. Flat, mean, disconnected from anything that resembles basic decency. And that matters. Because Mueller wasn't some random name pulled out of nowhere. Mueller was the former FBI director. Mueller was the special counsel against Trump. Mueller was the man whose investigation hung over Trump for years. So when Trump says something like that, I'm glad he's dead, it doesn't land as some stray ugly comment floating in space. It lands like a window into what's actually sitting there underneath all of it. Because this is what keeps happening. Something serious happens, something weighty, something that ought to call for at least a shred of restraint, an iota of decency, and instead Trump turns it into one more moment to settle a score, throw out contempt, and keep walking. And that's the pattern. Not reflection, not seriousness, not dignity. Just impulse, resentment, the need to put something ugly into the air because apparently that alone is enough for Donny Boy. And the longer you sit with it, the worse it gets. Because this isn't just about Mueller. It isn't about Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner. It's about what it says that this is the reaction. Mueller dies. Trump doesn't say a word about service. Doesn't say a word about family. Why would he? Doesn't say a word about the office the man held, the years spent in government, the war he fought in, the life he actually lived. None of that. Trump skips right past all of that, of course, and goes straight to what only he knows best, spite. Tells you something. Tells you that for Trump, everything gets flattened into the same ugly little transaction. Did you help him or hurt him? Did you flatter him or cross him? Did you serve him or challenge him? That's it. That's the scale. That's the whole measuring stick. Everything else gets burned off. So when people act like these moments are random, they're not. When people act like this is just another off-the-cuff comment by Donald, it's not. It fits. Fits the same pattern you keep seeing over and over again from him. Say the cruel thing. Say the ugly thing. Say the thing that poisons the room. Then leave it there and let everybody else deal with the smell. Do the least presidential thing you can do, Donald. And that's what this was. Not strength, not honesty, not toughness. Just rot. Said out loud. And it keeps going. Because now Trump turns around and demands that the president of Cuba step down. He throws it out there like it's his decision to make, like he's not just talking about another country, another government, but like Trump's assigning roles and removing people as if he's running the whole damn board. That's not how this works, of course. Trump doesn't control Cuba. Saying it out loud doesn't suddenly give him that power. But he says it anyway, expects it to land like authority. Look at what he's actually doing. He's pointing at another country, acting like he gets to decide who stays and who goes, like he can just declare it, and everyone's supposed to fall in line. They don't, because nothing follows that statement. No action, no shift, no change on the ground. It doesn't start anything. It doesn't trigger anything. Maybe a war. It just hangs there. And that's the tell. Because if this were real, you'd see movement, you'd see pressure build, you'd see reactions, you'd see something change. You don't. You get a sentence from Donald. That's it. And once you see that, it stops sounding strong, starts sounding ridiculous, because this isn't control. This is performance by Donald. This is what it looks like when someone talks like they're in charge of everything in his mind, without actually being in charge of anything outside of their own delusional words. And it's not just Cuba. You saw the same tone with Iran, the same posture, the same idea that saying something big is the same as doing something big. It isn't, because in the real world, things move or they don't. And this doesn't move anything by saying the president of Cuba should step down. It just sits there. Another statement with nothing behind it, another demand that's going nowhere unless he attacks Cuba like Iran, another moment where Trump says something like it's a decision and leaves it hanging like the job is done. And it isn't, because saying it doesn't make it real, Donald. It just makes it obvious. Okay, and now you got ICE agents being sent into airports to handle crowd management because TSA officers are calling out during the Department of Homeland Security shutdown. That alone should tell you something's off because TSA exists for a reason. That's their job. That's their function. Now that system's strained enough that they're pulling in a completely different agency to keep things moving. This isn't a small adjustment. It isn't normal. TSA officers are calling up as they're working without pay during a shutdown, showing up to do a high-pressure job with no paycheck, no stability, and at some point people stop showing up. Which means the system starts to thin out exactly where it can't afford to thin out. So instead of fixing that, instead of addressing the reason TSA agents aren't there, the response is to bring in ICE, drop them into airports like that, fills the gap. Like it could swap roles and everything keeps running the same. It doesn't, because ICE isn't TSA. Airport security isn't just standing there managing lines. It's screening, coordination, flow, training, a system that's built to handle volume and risk at the same time. And when the system starts breaking down, replacing with something like ICE doesn't solve it. It masks it and most likely makes it worse. That's what you're looking at. A system under pressure being patched instead of repaired, kept moving instead of actually fixed, because the priority isn't stability. It's keeping it from visibly falling apart. And this doesn't come out of nowhere, listeners. This ties directly back to the shutdown, to decisions that ripple outward. And now you're seeing that ripple hit one of the most visible, high-traffic parts of the country where people expect things to work. Instead, you've got fewer TSA agents, more strain on the system, a completely different agency stepping in to fill a role it wasn't built for. And that isn't a solution. That's a sign that something underneath it isn't holding. Because when a system's working, you don't have to do this. You don't have to substitute ICE for TSA. You don't have to improvise in real time. You don't have to keep things moving just enough so it doesn't stop completely. And that's where this lands. Because it isn't about optics. It isn't about messaging. It's about the fact that the system isn't functioning the way it's supposed to. And instead of addressing that directly, you're watching a patch job by Donald play out in real time. And that's what people are walking into right now. An airport system that isn't being stabilized. It's barely being held together. And finally, now the Supreme Court stepping in on a mail-in voting case. And this isn't some quiet, polite, legal exercise. This hits the core of who gets to vote, who counts, how hard it's going to be to actually have your ballot make it through if it comes in as a mail-in vote. People rely on this. Seniors, workers juggling jobs, anyone who can't stand in line for hours. They're counting on mail-in ballots. And now the highest court in the country is deciding how that process works. And it isn't abstract. It's real people, real votes, real consequences. And here's the blunt, straight truth. The court doesn't just interpret. It sets the rules. It decides what counts, what doesn't count, and how much friction gets jammed between a voter and their ballot. You don't have to ban voting outright. You just make it harder, tighten the deadlines, challenge the ballots, and adds extra steps that don't need to be there. Enough resistance that fewer people get through cleanly. That's how control happens quietly, surgically, and that's what we're watching. And don't think this stays in a book somewhere. Once the court rules, it ripples. States point to it. Lawyers argue over it. Future cases get built on this decision. This is the framework. It dictates how elections operate from the ground up. And it lands everywhere. How ballots move, how they're counted, how disputes get handled. Adjust those mechanics, and the whole system shifts without anyone seeing the full impact until it's too late. And make no mistake, everyone, this is the mechanics of democracy being reshaped. Control isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, procedural, and invisible until it's already locked in. And right now, that's exactly what's happening. Rules get set, people don't feel it immediately, and by the time it hits, a vote may already be delayed, disqualified, or devalued. That's the pattern, and it's relentless. So when you look at it, it isn't noise, it isn't background. This is the moment where the rules themselves are being defined by people you don't vote for, changing everything underneath. And once that line moves, you don't feel it all at once. You feel it later when a ballot doesn't count, maybe your ballot, when a deadline closes faster than it used to, when fewer people actually make it through. That's how it happens. Not loud, not obvious, but devastatingly effective. And by the time you realize it, it's already locked in, and the consequences have already started. I'm Jeff Allen Wolf. This is A World Gone Mad. I'm sitting in a room talking to myself. That's how I feel sometimes. I'll be back Wednesday. Until then, I urge you, the Wolf Pack, remain skeptical, question everything. Please don't lose hope. And most of all, stay alert.